Welcome to another episode of the Quaggling Sand Podcast. Recording right now at this very moment on the evening of July 6, 2021. Posting probably the next day, July 7th. Holiday weekend, threw off the schedule a little bit. I've been trying to get the shows on Tuesdays, which gives me a chance to get the week started on Monday, wherein I post our Hugo Floss podcast that we record on Sunday. Then I try to record the FFS Talk podcast on Saturday or Sunday. Try to get that posted on Monday, but every once in a while, a nice holiday weekend hits the spot and throws off the schedule accordingly. So I'm enjoying some coffee. I don't know if you've ever heard of Network Chuck. He's on all of the places. Network Chuck on LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, probably has his own network somewhere. And he has his own coffee brand, and so he will, during his shows, he will be sipping on his coffee mug. So I'm going to do that right now. Delightful. He has his own brand of coffee, so I'm a little bit jealous. So I'm mentioning the podcast because, as you noticed, if you saw the title of today's show, Not My First Radio. A little play on words, not my first rodeo, haha. I did not just jump into podcasting. First of all, I hate that word. I think I've mentioned that before, but I did not get into creating audio programs for download and playback at your leisure. Recently, it was actually around 2008, and that's going to be a combination of one of the things I'm focusing on now and story. So story time later will be the, if you happen to see the episode artwork for this Not My First Radio, it is my business card from our first podcast network that we created in Sunnyvale. So stay tuned for story time later. So I produce our podcasts. Hugo Floss is basically my mom, who has been a podcaster for years. So not her first radio, so to speak. My mom and I during the pandemic, would talk very frequently because my dad was going through a medical situation. And since we were all stuck at home, it was sort of, as you're wont to do, you check in on your parents, make sure they're okay, especially if you know one is ill and the other one's taking care of the other one, and making sure following the prescribed data collection techniques and whatnot. So we talk on the phone almost every day, probably 5 or 6 days a week. Mostly update, but then whatever's going on otherwise, whether it's pandemic news or whatever. So at some point, I think my mom said, "Hey, we should do a podcast. That's sort of like what we've been doing on the phone, except we'll just record it." And I said, "Sure, why not?" So inspired by the Mental Floss YouTube show by John and Hank Green and others. It's a good show. They have a lot of good shows. The Green brothers are a talented pair of siblings, to be sure. So Hugo Floss, and then the obvious sort of similarity, I guess, to a major clothing brand with ties to an unfortunate group of horrible people back in the 40s. So anyway, the idea was, hey, we'll kind of a play on words and a bit of an homage to this quality production of various types of mostly educational and informative content on YouTube, mostly. So hence Hugo Floss. And then Hugo Floss was already taken.com. So hugofloss.co, which means we sound like we're some sort of a company, ironically. .com for commercial, .co for whatever. But hugofloss.co, domain, and I will get to why I'm mentioning domains in a moment, but So that's sort of that's like the the one standard schedule that I've managed to really stick to because I have a co-host. Coffee time. This is my first Robusta bean. I have had many times before, many times, Death Wish, which is a blend of a dark roast of Arabica and Robusta for the caffeine. And this is apparently just a Robusta bean. I'll put the name of the coffee in the show notes. And don't forget, the show notes are available as a Substack newsletter. And I'll get into all of my thinking on these. That's the whole purpose of this show is about podcasting. So hugofloss.co. We don't have a website. Why? Well, because we're growing the listenership. My mom has already had a podcast and a website for her business. And so we figured, well, we'll try to get some listeners from her audience. So mostly she markets to them, and that really hasn't caught on. So then it was a question of, well, what do we want to do with a website? We don't know who we're going to be reaching out to. So it's mostly been friends and family. And then the question is, well, do people know how to share? How do you share a podcast, right? Like, you can't share a podcast to, well, you can sort of, but you share a podcast to somebody who understands what podcasts are. Otherwise, you're sharing, and it's not like YouTube, although I guess if we had a YouTube channel, that might be easier. But when you share a podcast, there is one of several possible outcomes. One is, I don't know what to do with this. One is, I can play it in my web browser with some HTML or JavaScript-based player. I can download an MP3 file if I have the wherewithal to do that, and I have a way to play them. I have a podcatcher. If you're an Adam Curry historian, you know the origins of that. I can subscribe to the RSS feed. I can use my podcatching software. I personally use player.fm with some caveats about whether I want to keep using it. But and there are probably other ways that people can consume podcasts. And there are the walled gardens that are going up. Anchor as part of Spotify, Apple, Amazon. Others are pulling in exclusives and maybe eschewing RSS feeds to publish, to allow resharing and resubscribing and all that. So it's going to be a little dodgy. So what does the hugofloss.co website need to accomplish? Which is true of any podcast. But I am not pleased with the state of affairs when it comes to RSS and generally publicizing a podcast. Coffee time? I'm kind of bummed that I'm playing with the grind on this new bean. And Robusta is a very different, just Robusta is a different flavor. So I had to add some stevia, which I am trying to avoid so I can actually just get the coffee flavor. I think if you mask your coffee with sweeteners or with cream or other things, if it doesn't taste good on its own, then you're doing something wrong, because it can, unless you don't like coffee. So anyway, back to the tale. So in my mind, the beauty of Facebook, and this is the only thing in my opinion, is Open Graph. They did some really interesting things with the Open Graph protocol. The meta tags that you put in the head of your document. So when you share a URL, you post it on Facebook or many other places now, either your web client, your browser, or sometimes the server, the destination, will visit the URL. They'll look for the head of the document, HTML document, and they will find some meta tags that point to an image, a title, a description, and a URL, I think, like a canonical URL. I can't remember. I think the minimum are the URL. I'm sorry, minimum are the title, image, and description, maybe. I think. Anyway, so this enables, rather than just pasting in a URL somewhere, as people used to do on Twitter or on their blogs or whatever, you paste a link and you have this underscore text. Maybe it's blue. It's a classic URL. Oh, click on the blue text with the underline. But by adding a visual cue of the image that can be controlled by the publisher with the meta open graph image URL. So they can provide a description, which you could look at as a sort of a tease or a deck if you're in the publishing world. So some text to draw you in, a title that could be different than the headline at the destination. So it could be a teaser headline and a teaser description, or a cover head, all that stuff. So that really did some interesting things. What I see though is not necessarily the same sort of attention to detail when it comes to podcast sharing. Now, this is not universal. I'm sure somebody somewhere has done a better job than I've encountered. But what I'm seeing is, I think I pointed this out in my in a previous podcast show. It was either on Quaggling Sand or possibly on FFS. I think it might have been on Quaggling Sand. Even the Podcast 2.0, podcastindex.org, Adam Curry and his programmer colleague, Dave something, I don't remember his last name. They publish they call it their board meeting. They're a nonprofit that is changing the podcast publishing game. So they publish their meetings, which are really just a discussion about the goings on of the project and other projects and comments and opinions and whatnot. So I found that they publish you can find their podcast in their podcast index, which is a good sign. It's working. If you visit the show notes, which are on Adam Curry's website, you can download the MP3 file, which is fine. But I didn't find an easy way. And when I say easy, I mean I should be able to post a link somewhere and it will do something similar to what, say, a YouTube link does, right? So when I post an open graph friendly, when I post a link somewhere to share, now if I'm sending somebody an email and I said, hey, check out this podcast, they may or may not get a nice, pretty open graph post, as you would see in a Facebook timeline or on Tumblr or on Twitter, etc. Twitter, by the way, supports Open Graph, but they also have Twitter cards. That's a different thing. I'll get to that in a second. But if you can share in your social media feeds and whatnot a link to a single page that has a player and the show notes and appropriate links and all that, and you can accomplish that with some of the hosting sites, for example, Anchor, which I do not like. I'm not a huge Anchor fan. They are minimally viable to me, but they at least do that, right? You can link to an episode of a show. You can have some human readable show notes. They are not ideal. The layout is not visually appealing because it's using the RSS description, which is a hack, sort of. But basically, you are able to share. In the case of Anchor, you can share a link to an episode, and the episode page will allow you to find the show page, which will have, quote unquote, all of the episodes, and you can subscribe to an RSS feed there and all. So it's reasonably self-contained and minimally viable for what I'm talking about. Other platforms do something similar. I am shocked, though, that the Podcast Index project, which is co-founded by the founder of the notion of podcasting, you can find Adam Curry's history of that. Maybe I'll maybe I'll post a link to it in the show notes, but you should find that if you're listening to podcasts, because you should find out where this all began so you know. And you'll know some of the challenges of the challenge of getting this to work initially, and then why that baggage is being carried today, which I'm not a fan of. But so the equivalent of an Open Graph share that I can send or link to or whatever, that is a self-contained, human-readable, and also machine-readable document, so that I can subscribe in a standard way. I can bookmark, share, reshare, all that. I can do all those things, which has been made almost, frictionless, to use another Facebook term. Coffee time. Delightful. So if I want to share an article in a news website, I know Bloomberg was putting up a fight on Open Graph, image and whatnot. But generally speaking, if I share a news article on Twitter, the Twitter card will be filled in with a link to the article, which they will minimize to a t.co short link for their own analytics purposes. An image will be displayed, descriptive text that is taken from the publisher. I am welcome to add my own commentary. And so it just sort of works. And if you post a video, YouTube, for example, and this is also true in Substack, if I paste in a YouTube link, it automatically fills in a video thumb, and you can click on it and go to an embedded player. So very nice. Hopefully that works for you. However you read the email version of the newsletter, the show notes newsletter. And if you are looking at it on the website, hopefully you're able to see an embedded YouTube video. I do that for my personal newsletter, the danhugo.substack.com newsletter. I have a section called How Funny, and I post videos of stand-up comedians that I discover on YouTube, recommended or otherwise. Sometimes I know of them. So it makes it visually appealing, and it makes the flow of a share. It stands out. The structure makes it visually organized for the reader. So if you're skimming along down your Facebook or Twitter feed, and you can see, picture, that gives you a quick, if the picture is indicative of what the link is about, gives you a quick way to kind of get your interest piqued. So if it's an embedded video, perhaps it will play, or perhaps there's a link that you click, and it will, however you actually get to consume. It's a less frictionless is a pretty good word, actually. So there's less friction involved with you as the consumer of something that's been shared with you that may be interesting to you. It gets you to the point more quickly and easily, and it's something, if you want to get back to it later, at least it plants a seed in your mind. So podcasting, you want to have some sort of the episode artwork is a good thing. It's like album art. I mean, there's a sort of identity that will stick in your mind, hopefully. So I've been trying to do interesting or fun things with our episode art. And by the way, the episode art for this week's episode is my business card for Radio Sunnyvale. So we'll get to that in a second. So if I could share a human readable document using all of the normal things that exist today, the Open Graph, the Twitter card, schema.org, structured data, so that you will show up in the knowledge graph on Google. It'll help you with your SEO, all these things that have been developing for decades on the HTML front, which have not been developing on the RSS/XML front, or maybe even Atom. So Atom, RSS. Yes, there are namespace extensions. Yes, Apple has added some iTunes stuff for content guidance, whether it's adult language, I guess, and some other Apple extensions, right? So, okay, yes, extensible. It's very nice. RSS to me is a machine readable format. It should be like a sitemap. It should point to content that is current and updated, newly added, with enough information. Like, for example, if you update, like if you republish after you've edited some audio in your podcast episode, the item ID should be globally unique, or at least, globally unique for your feed at least. And so your podcatcher, your RSS reader software, should see an item that it has seen before with a new date, and it should know that that item has been updated, and it should do the right thing for the user interface, right? It should show you as the human side of that, like, oh, this item has changed. Does that always happen? Not necessarily. Who knows? You have no control over that. However, if you know a person is visiting your website and you have updated a previously published podcast episode, you might present the most current episode by publish date or update date. So that says, oh, this episode that was published last Monday, there's been a new episode on the next Monday, and now it's Thursday, and we want to update the previous Monday's episode. There's no guarantee that your podcatcher software will display that in a way that you have any control over. But if you're able to publish your own stream, you might say, oh, here's the ordering of the episodes in updated order, and 2 weeks ago that one's been updated. So the point is, if you are creating human readable content, show notes, host, guest, publication dates, episode artwork, tags, transcripts, there's all these things that are intended for humans to consume, and you really have no control over that. And many decades have been spent on HTML5, CSS, JavaScript, accessibility. And by the way, podcasts without a transcript are not accessible, obviously. So there are things that have been accomplished on the print side or on the text side, and the video side has been kind of following along, but the podcasting side, in my opinion, has been left in some weird, like, who's driving this thing. And what you end up with is this morass of RSS support, partial, full extensions, maybe the way that the CData hack is going to be displayed. Anchor enables you to edit your show description, your episode description text, which will appear as a description in the CData. So you can embed HTML tags to some degree using the CData hack, which allows you to put tags within tags, right? So, because an XML file is supposed to be XML, not HTML. So you're allowed to put CData into the XML description tag for your item, podcast, episode. And then hopefully the podcatcher or other software will display that in some useful way. So Anchor allows you to boldface some of the type, right? So if you want to have a section like support the show, if I boldface that, strong or emphasis, Anchor itself does not display, from what I've seen so far, does not display the text on the episode pages according to the way their editor allows you to format it. So right away you're like, well, why do I bother? Why do you bother? Why do you bother allowing your users to apply some basic formatting, and then you don't actually display it with that formatting? So that's very frustrating. So if we took advantage of the schema.org, CSS, modern HTML5, embedded players, semantic tags. Schema.org has the item type with fairly granular item types that you can. There are media, there's video, podcasts, written works, authors, hosts, guests. These are all machine readable components that are all already standardized in schema.org, which is already supported by all of the major search engines. So, both of them. Drink coffee time. So anyway, the thing with hugofloss.co and then by extension quaglingsand.com, ffstalk.com, other shows coming up on the horizon. The thing I don't want to do is get trapped in the RSS chaos where I depend entirely on podcast software reading my RSS feed and dealing with that. Now, of course, you have to support it because that's the way the game is played right now. So, it is what it is. But the primary source of truth, the place where you would go to get the original published episode of each of the shows that we're working on, is to go to the respective website, and you find the channel or the show for which you are seeking a particular episode or all of them, and there they are. And yes, you can do that with WordPress today, but my notion, especially in the case of FFS Talk, which is a topic arc-based production, I would like, maybe chronological order is interesting, but relating different episodes that are following different topic arcs and possibly intersecting is something I'd like to experiment with a little bit. So on top of being a developer myself in general, I have specific ideas about what I would do. Now, Podcast Index is doing some interesting things on the indexing side. They have an open source database of shows and episodes from all over. So nice, well done. But also to make consumption and discovery and sharing, commenting, consuming, I say that, consumption, all of these things, like I said, have been advancing nicely in the areas of text, right? Publishing newspaper style, magazine style, other style of the printed word with associated media, images usually, or video, captions, accessibility, screen reader, sharing, all the open graph stuff. Twitter cards enable embedding a player. So you can embed a player for media, or you can embed a image or a large image. So it's very much like Open Graph, and in fact, they will use the Open Graph tag data if you are not using Twitter card metadata. So these are fine. These are good. We're getting somewhere. So if you have episode art, as I try to make for each of my episodes, thank you Unsplash and now Pexels, and there's some other interesting places to get flexibly licensed attractive imagery. So that's good. So if you can make your podcast sound good, which I try, could be better, could always be better. If you can make a good show with interesting guests, you can create some nice visually appealing episode artwork, or possibly a companion presentation, a slide deck or whatever. Maybe you have a simulcast video and audio podcast stream that you then publish. Who knows? The possibilities are endless. The same sort of flexible, mature, evolved production tools and methods should be available as a transport for this, what is essentially, at the end of the day, it's an MP3 file. It's one file. and the infrastructure to consume and digest RSS feeds is mostly usable. There are always issues with RSS feeds. I don't know, maybe because it has grown up sort of organically. But if you can take all of the advancements in HTML, the machine readable metadata that is part of the schema.org infrastructure, the sharing infrastructure of Open Graph, you can tie all that together and have podcast software podcatchers that can look at an HTML page, find the schema.org markup, the item type and item data attributes, or the JSON LD or the RDF encoded data for a particular episode or channel or show. If you can do all that, the RSS feed can be conveniently and comfortably deprecated so that it's still there. I mean, you're not going to just kill it tomorrow, which I think Apple and Spotify would like to do. But you can say, the modern tools we have at our disposal are built for providing content to humans to watch, listen to, read, fill out, fill in, comment on, share. All these tools exist already. Sharing a podcast, as I gave the example earlier with the podcast index episode that I was trying to share the episode that I was listening to, and it was actually about Anchor/Spotify removing RSS feeds, or intending or announcing that intention to do so. Coffee time. So I try, it'd be nice to share. If I share a podcast, if I say, hey, here's an episode of this show, just like when you share a video on YouTube, the thumbnail is a capture of the image. Is an image capture of the video. There can be an embedded player, or it's a link to the proper place to play the video. There, you want to find the description and then the publisher, who created it, and the dates, so YouTube has created this sort of a container that I can share easily. Comments, I can watch later, I can like or dislike. That's all sort of self-contained, and that structure has been duplicated elsewhere. So if I want to share a Vimeo video, or maybe a library or various other platforms, I can share the video. Similar results. So now with a podcast, the notion is I want to do the same thing. The container should be completely computer friendly, but human readable, and I should be able to share this source. And I think now there's the alt. What is it called? The alt href. So they're providing alternative places to find audio, right? So if one feed goes down, there are alternate places, and that's encoded in your RSS feed for your show. Okay, that's fine. You can do the same thing if you provide the right attributes in your markup. You can provide a list of alternative feed locations of backup images and files, MP3 files. You may want to provide an MP3 and an OGG or a FLAC, right? So give me a compressed, give me an uncompressed, putting the transcripts in there. So all of these things that RSS may or may not be good at, I'm going to say may not be good at, you can accomplish with a far more mature, far more broadly adopted and implemented set of tools on the HTML5 side, with embedded playback tools, media handling, and broadly accepted and almost we'll put it in scare quotes, standardized attribute markup infrastructure for providing embedded machine readable data for your content that is itself human readable. So these are all, it's a word salad, I know. But at the end of the day, I think one of the reasons that podcasting has been so weird, I mean, look at the biggest podcast on the planet, Joe Rogan. I'm not a huge fan of the show. I used to watch it, and I say watch, even though he calls it a podcast. I used to watch it on YouTube, and kind of frustrating. That's a different topic for a different day. But he moved to the Spotify contract, and which shows can you see and which can you not, and whatever. Just the notion of sharing that podcast has itself become an issue. Like, which shows are you allowed to watch and all that, which kind of breaks the spirit of podcasting. But as well, he kind of reignited, and I'm not saying that podcasting was not alive and well before, but it's shown a very bright light on him and his show and the audience and the guests and the whole thing. And there's been a kind of an explosion of podcasters, and I've rejoined the fray, trying to get away from social media silos so I can self-publish just like everybody else can. So the tools, I think, were not keeping up, because certainly YouTube has taken the world by storm since I think it was 2005. I actually looked this up one time when I was talking about share video. It was one of my stories in the past episode. So video, YouTube has sort of driven a standard, again, scare quotes, way of sharing and consuming for humans media. And yes, you can post your audio podcast on YouTube, maybe with avatar faces or what do you call it? Like graphical images that reflect the audio. What is that called? Like a visualization of the audio, right? So bouncing sine waves and stuff. Whatever it is, you can post that on YouTube, and you will probably be more easily discovered. But not everybody wants to use YouTube. Not everybody wants to consume your podcast in the YouTube environment. Maybe they want to download the show and play it on a little MP3 player while they're jogging, or who knows. So the idea is to go where your customers are, go where your listeners are, make it easy. So part of what I want to do with the web stuff is explore a more usable, modern approach to show publishing, with RSS being like the deprecated, still there, but not the most favorite status for discovery, sharing, consuming, etc. So there you go. Story time. I think it was 2008. I was working at Palm. Was I working at Palm or Jawbone? I may have been working at Jawbone. Either way, I was attending a class, a nonprofit called Sunnyvale Leadership, I think. And it was the Leadership Sunnyvale class. And it was a class of about 40 people from various parts of the city, Sunnyvale, California. Police, city government, business, individuals, whatever. And you paid, but you could get a scholarship, right? So I basically was attending for free as an individual. Very nice. Coffee time. I think it was like $1,500. And we'd go every week. A lot of field trips, etc. So we learned in our travels that the city of Sunnyvale, while the third largest city on the peninsula, San Jose was the largest at the base of the peninsula. San Francisco, second largest at the other end of the peninsula of the Bay Area. Obviously, this doesn't include Oakland, Berkeley, East Bay. But Sunnyvale was the third largest, and at the time it was 120-ish thousand. I think now it's 140-ish thousand, maybe more. So for being our big city, quote unquote big city, our little hamlet did not have any media. The Sunnyvale Sun was published by Sidewalk Media, Dan Polcrano, and others, and eventually was purchased by the San Jose Mercury people. I think we had one normal reporter, and she didn't live in Sunnyvale. There was no radio stations. There were no TV. There was no movie theater. There's a list of things that there was none of. For being a reasonably sized, it was larger at the time than any other two of the cities on the peninsula. So Menlo Park plus Palo Alto, Mountain View plus Stanford. I don't know. Mountain View plus Atherton, whatever. Pick a couple of cities, and Sunnyvale was still the largest. So we were struck by that. Like, wow, how can you have a city like this without? So one of my classmates, Kevin, not college, but Leadership Sunnyvale, so not college Kevin. Hey, Kevin, if he is listening. So other Kevin and I used to have this discussion. We were, every show, every week, like, man, why is there not something? And so we said, hey, let's make our own local, we'll do a podcast radio station thing. Amazon had launched the AWS S3 service. So I made a crappy website, and we were publishing our shows in S3 buckets, which I think I found recently. So I'll try to pull some of those shows out if they're still around. So S3, very cool idea. Made it easy to publish, and people could get to the content very easily. RSS feeds, all that, very easy. So Radio Sunnyvale, we were doing multiple shows. One was doing business in Sunnyvale. I would talk to people who were doing business in Sunnyvale. Sounds crazy. We did Kevin and Dan on the weekends. So we would talk about what was going on during the week. We launched, however, this was our big break. We were having a city council election. 3 of the, I think it was 7 seats. So 3 were up for vote. There were 6 candidates. And we don't have TV, we don't have radio, we don't have a newspaper to speak of, we don't have a forum to engage with our candidates. So somehow I was able to convince the Chamber of Commerce to sponsor what I would call a 1-on-3. It was each candidate individually, so we didn't have a debate, but we just interviewed each candidate at the Chamber of Commerce office. We set up our microphones with the mixers and all that stuff. And the Chamber of Commerce was to lend an air of respectability to this otherwise startup venture. And then Kevin and myself, so Tammy, can't remember her last name, and Kevin, me, and then the candidate. Strangely, while they did sort of know us, I think the fact that we were working with the Chamber and we were both in the Leadership Sunnyvale program, which was fairly well regarded and something of a high profile source for Chamber and City Council and local government staff, everybody knew of it, and people would tend to matriculate from there to, other positions of responsibility. So, yeah, we entered into this with a certain amount of credibility, I suppose. So we didn't have to provide questions beforehand. We didn't have to get a pre-interview. There was they walked in, sat down, and let us ask anything we wanted, and they answered. And then we published all of the interviews at the same time. So 6 individual interviews published, and we got a little bit of buzz from that. It's like, oh, nobody else did this. So pretty cool. And then at some point, oh, by the way, So we did the Kevin and Dan show, doing business in Sunnyvale, and then there were some other little projects. Eventually, I was able to do a call in and leave a voicemail, and we'll play that during the show if you want to ask a question. So when we were having the mayor was elected by the city council from the city council, so it wasn't really an election, but the new mayor, when she was about to become the new mayor, she and I sat in a coffee shop and with my little Zoom recorder with our 2 microphones, and I had 1 or 2 voice messages and played them, and she answered them, and so I edited that together. And there again, people were very trusting that you're going to edit this out. I didn't play any games, so keep my end of the credibility up, the credibility assumption, I suppose. So yeah, we had a legitimate local media, and then there was a guy named Rick. I won't give last name so much just because I will give his last name, but I've not asked if I can do that. So Rick was working somewhere in Sunnyvale, had heard the show, and he said, hey, I want to put you in touch with the guy who built the Stanford radio station and see if we can't get Radio Sunnyvale to be a real low-power AM station. I spoke to Toyota Sunnyvale. I spoke to the city about placing an antenna on top of the taller buildings. They were actually quite supportive. If the economy wasn't spiraling, remember it was 2008. So if the economy wasn't spiraling downward rapidly, we probably would have continued, but it didn't seem to make sense to start investing money in something where businesses were trying to keep their doors open. And now that we've gone through 2020, we know how fun that can be when they don't quite make it. So yeah, Radio Sunnyvale kind of suffered because of the downturn at that time, but otherwise it was an interesting learning experience, to be sure. So woulda, coulda, to this day I'll wonder, should we have pressed forward and try to keep it going or try to pay our bills? Because nobody was paying for anything. It was all out of pocket. The economy was what it was. People were interested, but not that interested. But I was able to go to the cold weather shelter, for example, and interview people about their life and how they found themselves there and other interesting people stories, human interests. And so I always found that to be one of the most valuable parts of podcasting, was that you can talk to anyone. You can create any sort of discussion forum and have any sort of discussion in that forum, whether it's live, whether you have, live chatting, drop in now of Clubhouse style, whatever. There are so many tools available now. So producing and then making available and discoverable and easily consumable all of this very accessible possibility continues to be fascinating to me. And so that's how I arrived at, hey, yeah, I can be a podcaster again. Why not? And so the shows that I have re-entered the fray with are experiments. The Hugo Floss show is, we've had 2 guests. Would like to take it into like a live stream discussion format at some point, just to keep it interesting. Same with this show. I'd love to talk to other people about their projects they're working on, what I'm working on. Doesn't have to be in Vegas. In fact, probably more interesting if it isn't. So, the world, big place. The FFS Talk podcast, I would like to actually have what I will call smart discussions. So not complaining. Sometimes online media can head that way. Independent media can head into this bickering, complaining, propaganda even. So highly agenda-full publication of opinion, which is fine. Totally, that's what this is, really. I'm talking about me a lot. And so come on down. We'll talk about you too. But yeah, FFS talks with topic arcs. I would like to have interesting discussions about particular areas, not talk about what's wrong, but talk about how we can fix what's wrong. Possible ideation. Let's bounce some ideas around. We can complain all day, but we can do that on our own time. Let's see how we can talk about our flat tire until the sun sets, but we can also fix it and get on our way. So that's the thinking. Anyway, that is going to wrap up another. So I was just checking the elapsed time right now is about 50 minutes. So they always end up being about an hour. My voice always goes south for at least half of it. Coffee is maybe not the best beverage for that. Maybe some tea next time. Especially when it's room temperature coffee now. As I've mentioned many times, speaking of coffee, I have a profile on buymeacoffee.com/Dan Hugo. There are links to the various things I've talked about today as far as newsletters and podcasts, and there are some project mentions that will turn into links when I actually put stuff out for the public to consume. If you could all come over and just play with my computer, you can see some of these things, but when they're publicly accessible, there will be more links, project links and whatnot, and then there will be some other podcasts and whatnot. So all this stuff is appearing out of band, so to speak, on www.buymeacoffee.com/Dan Hugo. You are not obligated to actually buy me a coffee, although you certainly can. To me, it's a convenient place to bundle the links, and this being Las Vegas, the tip jar, if you will, one convenient place. If I have a personal blog or a business website, or these various projects have their websites, I can update the cross-promotional components, I suppose. So that would be more in-band, but out-of-band, Buy Me a Coffee seemed like an interesting idea. And as well, where some of my projects will make money, maybe very little, but they are the source of revenue. Lifestyle businesses, as they say. Buy Me a Coffee, the intent is if you or someone you know wants to actually spend money, I will gladly accept it. The proceeds that land at buymeacoffee.com/Dan Hugo will go for a coffee. So the coffee I'm drinking right now technically was not on the list. Sort of an Audible, not the ebook, but just a slight change of plans. I was going to, I was going to get some Death Wish medium roast, which is a new product. I've had their dark roast. I've had probably 20 or 30 pounds of their dark roast over the years. So medium roast is new, or some Lavazza espresso roast, or both. But this, which I said I will put in the show notes newsletter, seemed interesting. I had never had a pure Robusta coffee before, so that I know of. So now I have. So buymeacoffee.com/Dan Hugo. Anything there will go towards coffee devices, coffee equipment, coffee support, or maybe a coffee shop if I venture outside. You can subscribe to our show notes on quagglingsand.substack.com. If you are using pod-catching software or a player of some kind, you hopefully will be able to see the episode notes or the show notes for each episode. And I include a link to the show notes site, Substack. And we also have a weekend to just throw some random stuff at the end of the week, which is on Review, which is a Twitter property now. So a different newsletter, different content. So it's not about shows, it's just about wrapping up the end of the week. And then you can also get the main show published on Anchor for now, and these will always continue moving forward, although eventually the primary sources will be, at hugofloss.co, quaglingstand.com, ffstalk.com, etc. So for now, Substack, Review, Anchor are ways to get the stuff out there. But anyway, so check your podcast player, show notes, description, whatever. There will be a link to the Substack show notes, quaglingstand.substack.com. Not my first radio. If you find the show notes for this episode on Substack, that's what they'll be called, and you can have a look. So thank you for listening again. Don't forget, you are always welcome to join this show if you want to be a guest. We'll talk about what you're working on for a change. I'm getting tired of hearing myself talk. I know you are too. So why don't you come on and see what's up and tell everybody else. You can drop an email to join, as in join an episode, join, Join, at quaglingstand.com. See when you're available. And eventually, as an audience gets to a respectable level, we'll start doing live streams and chats and other normal things. Thank you again, and I look forward to having guests like you. Thank you.